After the much tamer Halloween Horror Nights 11 in 2001, Universal would bring back the annual Halloween event for its 12th iteration in 2002, exciting many new and returning guests who would come. But this year would enter new territory as they would move the fame event to a neighboring location across from Universal Studios, Florida. Horror has a new home. Get ready to enter the Islands of Fear. This is SP History. In the year 1999, Universal would open its second major theme park called Universal's Islands of Adventure. This new park would feature 6 uniquely themed lands based on different famous literary works, and within each land included many state-of-the-art attractions and shows where guests could live the adventure. The park's concept was amazing, and by 2002, the park was a success as many guests came to live out their own adventures, making Islands of Adventure a logical choice to be the new home of the prestigious Halloween event. In developing this year's event, Universal had the idea to incorporate the different islands of the park into the houses and scare zones, turning the park into the ultimate sphere of evil. In addition, they would continue to use a central icon to promote it and be the center of the story behind all the houses and scare zones as well. Before crafting the final concept of the 2002 event, there would be an initial one that Universal made to be the story. They would again create a new character to serve as the icon, this time being a young female called Cindy Bearer. Cindy's story would be that she was a disturbed child as her parents Paul and Kara Bearer ran a funeral home and her life was surrounded by darkness and death. She was an only child and her only friend she had was her porcelain doll, which she considered her sister. Other than her doll, she would befriend the corpses in the home, fulfilling her disturbing imagination. Alongside her madness, her parents were also just as disturbing as they would too use the corpses to their own pleasures, creating an extended family with them. After 2 teens witnessed the bearer's unsettling activities, the police would launch an investigation, leading an angry mob of family members of the dead to burn down the bearer's funeral parlor with them inside. Little did the mob know, Cindy had escaped the flames into a graveyard and disappeared, leaving her burnt doll as the only piece of evidence of her escape. Cindy's essence would find its way towards Islands of Adventure, and the park would become the manifestation of her evil mind. Each island would be inhabited by her playthings as they represented her twisted imagination, and the event would be labeled as Islands of Horror, transforming the park into the nightmare world of Cindy. But though this concept was far into development, Universal would have to scrap the idea of Cindy due to a string of child abductions in the era in 2002, feeling the icon was insensitive for the time being. With that, Universal would keep the concept of using the islands as a setting to the different aspects of the event, just with a new icon and storyline. The new icon would be an altered version of Cindy's father, Paul Bearer, with his new name now becoming Albert Kane, or more known as the Caretaker. His story would take parts of the original concept of Paul Bearer, but molding him into his own. Kane was a caretaker of the Shady Oaks Cemetery and lived in a Victorian-style mansion with his family, in which Cindy was a part of, just not focused on. With Kane formerly being a respected surgeon, he had interest into the human body and what would happen when people died. In searching for answers, the caretaker would use the recently deceased and living vulnerable as subjects of his evil experiments to find people's souls. With his work being rumored around his town of Cary, Ohio, the police investigated Kane, and the sinister doctor would cooperate with the authorities, proclaiming his findings and disturbing everyone. With news spreading of his horrific acts, the townspeople would form a mob and burn down Kane's mansion with him and his family inside, but like in the original concept, Kane and his family remains were not found in the rubble, except for Cindy, the former icon. With the conceived thought that Kane escaped the fire, he would now appear at Halloween Horror Nights as the Shepherd of Evil, as he would lead guests into the Islands of Fear, which would be the main tagline of this year's Halloween festivities. With everything conceptualized and ready to go, Halloween Horror Nights Islands of Fear would run for 21 nights between October and November, including 5 houses, 6 scare zones, and 3 shows. Like discussed, the themes of the houses and scare zones would correlate with the existing islands in the park, converting them into evil versions of themselves. The first island guests would enter would be the transformed port of entry named Port of Evil. Within this first scare zone, it would be the Caretaker's Island as he would infest it with creatures ready to find Kane's newest victims. One of the shows that would occur here was called Town Square of Tortured Souls, and this would serve as the opening ceremonies to each night, as the Caretaker would have victims in different torture devices and perform horrific acts on the unfortunate souls. Originally, when Cindy was an icon, the zone would have kept the name Port of Entry, but it would still be just as sinister as it would be the entryway into Cindy's mind, as a projection of the icon would be displayed onto fog as she lures guests to play with her, and where creatures with red eyes would lurk around. The town square of Tortured Souls would have been still part of this concept, leaving out the Caretaker. Moving clockwise around the park, the next sinister island guests would encounter was an island where during the day, Marvel comic superheroes would save citizens from evil villains called Marvel's Superhero Island. But now during Halloween Horror Nights, the villains have won and defeated all the heroes as they wreak havoc on this once civilized island, now being named Island Under Siege. The zone featured many Marvel villains roaming around, scaring guests as chaos ruled over justice, all spearheaded by the Spider-Man villain, Carnage. This island would hold the first house guests would encounter, which was called Maximum Carnage. The house would be located in the Carnage Warehouse, a building that was specifically made for this house, and take guests into the evil secret hideout of Carnage, as he enlists misfits and other villains to inhabit his base and unleash terror on any unexpected victim. As guests descended into his evil lair, they would encounter Marvel villains like Electro and Sabretooth inside, and the Punisher would make an appearance at the end of the house with a flamethrower. In the original concept of the event, Island Under Siege was called Marvel City Under Siege, as Carnage would be one of Cindy's playthings, ushering the mayhem on the island. The premise was the same, but the differences were that the zone featured Bungie scare actors who would jump off the buildings into the island, scaring guests, and there would be actors with water soakers shooting water at guests, symbolizing snipers. Another difference was that the Maximum Carnage house would have been placed in the extended queue of the Storm Force Accelatron attraction, but Universal would elect to create an entire warehouse to hold it. Moving past Island Under Siege, guests would enter the third evil island, located in Toon Lagoon. Usually, this island is filled with characters from classic comic strips and cartoons, as it would have an assortment of water rides to experience, but now, this island becomes Treaks and Foons. Within this wacky, disturbed island, distorted cartoon characters would roam around and invite guests to play with them as foam and bubbles filled the streets. These characters were equally terrifying and playful as they would pull pranks with whoopee cushions and water-spitting flowers. This island would also hold a house within it, and it would be a sequel house to the most popular house from Halloween Horror Nights 11, Scary Tales, as this would now be called Scary Tales 2. The house was located in the Popeye and Bluto's Bilge Rat Barges attractions queue. It would have guests once again enter the twisted versions of classic fairy tales, but even more terrifying than ever. It had fairy tale characters like Alice and Little Red Riding Hood returning, but it also included new disturbing versions of Snow White and the Three Little Pigs, as there would be no happily ever after. The house would again be a fan favorite, and there would be more renditions of Scary Tales in the following years. In the original concept with Cindy, the island would have been called Twisted Tunes, and the Treaks and Foons were her playthings within here, but the premise was still the same. Scary Tales 2 was still a part of it, just with a different name called Scary Tales Volume 2 Malice in Terrorland, being a reference to the house's original title in 2001. In addition to the house and scare zone, the Toon Lagoon Island would host the mainstay show of Halloween Horror Nights in its amphitheater, Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure. In this rendition of the show, Bill and Ted return to save the world as Earth is threatened by an alien invasion that was masterminded by Triumph the Insult Dog, who is ultimately revealed to be Sharon Osbourne as she wanted to rule over all media. The other cast of characters included Dr. Evil, characters from Men in Black, and Gandalf. This version of the show was not the original concept, as when the event started, it had another storyline, but due to poor reception, it was changed to this version. Journeying further into the Islands of Fear, you would reach the next island that was set in Jurassic Park, being ultimately called JP Extinction. Within this area, guests enter the infamous park where dinosaurs roam, but during the night, the power goes out, leaving all the carnivorous dinosaurs loose and stalking their next meal. Scare actors would pose as velociraptors, hiding in the bushes, jumping out at unexpected victims, and Dino Men, half dinosaur, half human creatures, roam the streets, looking to feast too. These characters would also be featured in the main house in this area, placed in the Triceratops Discovery Trail, being titled Project Evolution. The house's story would tie into the movies as a mad scientist named Dr. Burton created these dino men as a part of a secret experiment, but now with the park being overrun with these hybrids and the other deadly dinosaurs, it leaves you stranded, looking for escape. Since this house was set in the Discovery Trail, it was mainly outside, and most of the scares would come from bushes, making it a more terrifying experience. Additionally, some props used in the house were actual film props that were from the Boneyard section in Universal Studios Florida. In the Islands of Horror concept, this area would have just maintained the name of Jurassic Park, still consistent the story with Dr. Burton being Cindy's plaything, but the house Project Evolution would have been named JP Extinction, which eventually became the name of the zone. But Project Evolution would not be the only house located in Jurassic Park, as another one would be placed in the Thunder Falls Terrace restaurant, being based off the hit reality show Fear Factor. With the house having the same title, guests must face many primal fears like snakes, worms, and darkness as they inhabit every corner of the house. The Rat Lady would make her annual appearance here, but this would not be enough, as this house was touted to be the worst house in the history of the event as it lacked scares and creativity. Fear Factor was a part of the Cindy concept and largely was the same. After escaping JP Extinction, guests would enter the fifth island of Fear, which was located in the Lost Continent where ancient myths and legends existed. But now the island was altered into a hellish medieval realm called Island of Evil Souls. In this island, it was controlled by a character called Nightmare, who would unleash his evil creatures to terrorize the island and feast on mortals. Though this zone would not feature a themed house to correlate with the island, it did host one entertainment offering within the streets, being called Studio 666. This would be a DJ party area inside the zone where guests could dance and have a good time with scare actors participated. In the event's original concept, the island was called Island of Lost Souls and would have retained the same story again, but Nightmare was highlighted as Cindy's plaything. In almost completing a full circuit around the park, guests would enter the final island of part of the event, which was located in Seuss Landing, an island mainly for kids as the creations of Dr. Seuss existed here. Due to the widow of the fame offer now allowing Universal to put anything scary in this island, they would leave it untouched and call it Booville. But Universal still had a story to the island, as it was said that all the Whos were hiding in their homes as the spirit of Halloween descended upon the streets, which explained the zone being empty and bare. The only additions to the island was weird music played throughout and fog filled the streets. The island would have been called Grinch Night in the original concept, as the story would have been different, as the Whos were hiding from the Grinch, making the town abandoned. But there would still be no scary themes in Seuss Landing. Though this land would not have anything scary, it would be an entryway to the most sinister attraction of this year's event, being the final house to discuss, called Scream House. This house would be located in Soundstage 20, the closest soundstage to Islands of Adventure, and would be the icon house for the Caretaker. The story was that guests now entered the burned down Victorian mansion of Albert Kane that was in his backstory, and all the victims who perished in his experience haunted this domain of horror, as they and the Caretaker looked to make you a permanent resident of the Scream House. This house was highly praised and would earn House of the Year, which would lead to many returns of the Scream House in the future. In the original concept, Soundstage 20 would have initially hold two houses inside, and before entering their individual queues, guests would enter a scare zone called the Isle of Fright, which would have had an element of fun and fear, but not much more is known about what exactly would be placed here. But like stated, there would be two houses in Soundstage 20, as one of them would have been an IP house and the other the initial concept of Scream House. The IP house would have been based off the 1982 sci-fi horror film directed by John Carpenter, The Thing. Assumedly, this house would take guests through different sets from the movie, but this house never made it past conception and would be scrapped early on in developing the Cindy concept, but the other house would remain and be fully fleshed out. The original name of Scream House was House of Dead Maniacs, and would have been in the burned down funeral parlor where the Bear family committed the horrific acts, and followed the same beats of the final concept where the souls haunting the house re-emerge, looking to claim anyone who entered. After so, guests who made it out would have completed their journey through the Islands of Fear and their contents, and have completed the full circuit of the 12th Halloween Horror Nights event. Halloween Horror Nights Islands of Fear will go down to be the most unique iteration of the Halloween event in its 30-year history, as it not only was able to weave the park's existing themes to the content of the event, but also established that Halloween Horror Nights can branch out of its comfort zone to make the event better and even more terrifying. Universal's Islands of Adventure proved to be the rightful new home for Halloween Horror Nights, and fear and mayhem would soon return to these islands in all new terrifying ways.